Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk about glyphosate with you guys because I've recently learned a whole lot of new stuff about it, and there's currently a huge controversy about glyphosate and whether it's safe or not. So I wanted to talk about, is it really safe? What is the effect glyphosate is having on our water supply? What is it having on our soil? What is the effect on the microbes? What is the effect that it's having on animals and the effect on humans? You know, for the longest time, Monsanto went unopposed to the use of glyphosate. Their stance was it wasn't harmful, it was non-toxic, there wasn't any evidence of any harm to the environment, and it's not harmful to humans. But the reason why they say that it's safe is because the way glyphosate works is it works by inhibiting a certain pathway in the weeds it's called the shikimate pathway, and it prevents the conversion of this certain enzyme. And this pathway is how the plant makes certain aromatic amino acids and other aromatic substances like polyphenols. And since humans don't have this shikimate pathway, it's thought not to affect us. And they actually use this in marketing schemes. They would have some of the really ignorant sales reps of Roundup would go around even drinking it, and when they're talking and trying to sell it, saying, "Oh, it's non-toxic," which that was kind of a little crazy. So they went unopposed to, there wasn't any proof that glyphosate was dangerous until just recently, last year. The International Agency for Research on Cancer released this statement saying that glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans. And they put it in this group 2A category, which means that it basically, there's not enough evidence to show that it is carcinogenic in humans, but there's enough evidence that it is carcinogenic to animals. So what is the connection of glyphosate of the IARC statement to cancer? So the groups that are against using glyphosate claim that the detrimental effect to humans is because it disrupts the microbiota in our intestines that do contain that shikimate pathway, thereby indirectly causing harms to humans that affect our gut flora balance. And it causes an emergence of resistant strains, pathogenic strains. And it causes oxidative stress and it's actually linked to many of our chronic illnesses today, even autism, Alzheimer's, heart disease, depression, infertility, and cancer. And one of the things that I notice when I'm working with clients is that when we have an imbalance of flora in our gut, then we have an imbalance in our neurotransmitters. These aromatic amino acids are the amino acids that make our brain neurotransmitters. And the microbiota in our gut help make some of these amino acids for us. Okay, so I looked over several studies. I wanted to look at some studies that were pro-glyphosate and some studies that were against using glyphosate. So I wanted to look at a wide variety. So I chose this one here to look at the soil microbes. What is glyphosate doing to the microbes in our soil? And so what they found, they measured several different types of pesticides, and they included glyphosate, and they measured the soil activity by measuring the carbon dioxide production. And it showed that after like 15 days that the carbon dioxide production was significantly less. And so this showed that the pesticides are highly toxic to the soil microbes. Now, whether this translates to, being toxic to us or not really remains to be seen. We have to really do more tests to see if the plants actually are taking up the glyphosate, if it's actually going into us and actually harming the gut flora, and to see if it's actually sufficient to cause harm to us. Just because we can see that it's killing off the microbes in the soil and having a significant impact on them, we can't actually translate it to us. Okay, so now another study that I looked at was looking at the effect of glyphosate on a certain microbe called Aspergillus nigellans. And there were multiple effects on how it interferes with this particular microbe. So in this study, they actually used 100 times less of a concentration of a dose than is actually used in agriculture, okay? And it showed 100% die-off of the microbes at 100 times lower dose when they use microbes. But when they use Roundup. Now the interesting thing was they did another study when they one with Roundup, which has a whole lot of other things in it, adjuncts, chemicals, and surfactants. And then they did another study, which is glyphosate alone at 10 times higher concentration. And that was interesting because the glyphosate alone only killed off 30% of the microbes, compared to when it was Roundup with all these other things. So it is suggestive of, the product Roundup was even more toxic, up to 1,000 times more toxic than just glyphosate alone. And what they found, that it altered growth of these microbes, it affected the cellular polarity, and delays endocytosis, and it impairs mitochondria function. And this is that's my big thing when I work with clients is the mitochondria, because we have to have ATP for all our cellular processes. And so I was looking at all of the enzymes that it affected. It affected most of the enzymes in the mitochondria, the citrate synthase, malate dehydrogenase, malate synthase, aconitase, and succinate dehydrogenase. If you are poisoning the enzymes, impairing the enzymes in the mitochondria, this can have a really huge effect on how you feel and the energy production, and then it's just going to go downstream from there. Now, it also impairs endocrine dysfunction involving aromatase. Now, aromatase is an enzyme in the hormone-making process, and impairs retinol signaling. So vitamin A is very important for our immune function and for digestion and in our enterocytes in the gut. And so when we mess with the vitamin A signaling, we're going to have quite a bit impairment in our immune function. And it also inhibits intracellular transport function. So there's a lot of things going on in this bacteria, this particular bacteria that this study showed. Now, so I had someone that had told me that he had glyphosate poisoning and was willing to share his oat test with me. And so I wanted to show you on this oat test, if you look at the succinic, how it was really, really high, and the malic is low, and the oxobluteric is low. So this mitochondrial pattern is quite impaired. And the important thing about this succinic being so high is we have to. This is the point in the mitochondria where we pass electrons over to the electron transport chain, and that's where the bulk of our ATP is made. I think there's something like 96 ATP made in the electron transport chain, and where I think we only have about 13 made in the Krebs cycle or something. I don't know. I have to go do my calculations again, and I don't want to do that. But it can significantly impair the amount of ATP you're able to make if succinic is high, and that succinic dehydrogenase enzyme is collapses. And so we can use this enzyme as a biomarker for glyphosate toxicity. Now, another interesting study I looked at is they actually took the microbiota from some cows. And these cows were fed feed that was highly treated with glyphosate. Okay, and what they took, so it was actually an in vitro test. So basically, they took the microbiota out of the cow and they put it in a petri dish, and then they looked at the species. And what they found was that the lactobacillus and the bifido species were very susceptible to glyphosate poisoning, but the pathogenic bacteria, the Clostridium botulism species, was highly resistant. So in farm animals will commonly consume all kinds of bacteria, including the botulism bacteria in the food, but our microbiota, especially the Enterococcus species, will keep it in check. It will degrade it, and keep it from multiplying, and it'll degrade the botulism species. But when you're killing off the lactobacillus and you're killing off the bifido, now there's nothing to keep the botulism species in check. And so botulism, is a neurotoxin, and it makes that botulism B-O-N-T, and it actually can impair the nervous system of these farm animals. And they found these farm animals were having neurological symptoms, falling down, can't stand up, and it was because they were being poisoned with botulism. And also, what was happening, glyphosate is a very potent chelator, and so it chelates the minerals and makes it not available. So these cows that were showing signs and symptoms of botulism poisoning also had very low trace minerals. Now, inside the microbes, the glyphosate will bind to the minerals, and it causes a disruption of the homeostasis of the microbes, and it will kill the microbes by that way too. Now, the third thing that it is doing is it has it inhibits the cellulolytic enzymes to break down cellulose. Now, animals eat grass and all kinds of cellulose stuff, and they break it down into short chain fatty acids, gases, and other fiber products. So now they're unable to break down this cellulose needed for proper health of the animal. And okay, so now this is another study this is on poultry, looking at the glyphosate effects on the microbiota in the poultry. And we saw the very same thing that we saw in the cows. And it showed that it was killing off the bifidos, the lactobacillus, and the enterococcus. And then, of course, we had pathogenic strains of salmonella and clostridia that were resistant. So, of course, the resistant strains are going to start growing, and we're killing off the beneficial strains. And it's really interesting because this is what I see in my patients that get stool testing. Is I'm seeing really low lactobacillus and bifido strains, and I'm seeing higher clostridial strains and more pathogenic strains emerging. And it's affecting the health of the individual. Now, in these poultry animals, in these chicken or poultry, whatever animals they use, it was we were having a rise of foodborne illnesses by Campylobacter. And it's directly related to the reduction of the bifido and lactobacillus species that inhibit it. And so the study was stating that the theory is that enough of the glyphosate in the feed of these animals that's causing the rise of this foodborne illness. So I had to actually try to find some studies that were pro-glyphosate to, look at both sides of the fence. And so the supporters of glyphosate said that glyphosate is just a weak chelator, and they compared it with EDTA. EDTA is a very potent chelator of metal and ions, and they said that it's very weak compared to EDTA, and so they prophesied or they theorized that it would have minimal effect on the minerals in the soil and the microbes. And they said, and they also argue it really depends on the dose, and that in vivo, which means in the body, we have an enormous amount of ions, and the minimal amount of glyphosate is that's taken up is going to be minimal. Just due to the sheer numbers alone will minimize the chelating effect. So that's how what their stance is, and they're trying to minimize the effects of glyphosate just by sheer numbers. And they also conclude that it's not really going to have a likely effect on the mineral content of the soil because they say that the effect of the soil bacteria is because it depends on concentration, and then the effect of glyphosate binding to minerals, manganese was one of the things that they looked at, says that, it hasn't been proven that it actually binds to manganese. And they say that when it's applied to the soil, it's degraded in the soil by the microbes, and that it's not going to leach into the groundwater because it's degraded quite rapidly, and that, that leaching would only occur if the soil is highly contaminated with metals, and only if at high rates or repeated applications of glyphosate. But of course we're going to repeat glyphosate applications, right? Every crop, aren't they repeating it? And so after 20 years, how many times is glyphosate going to be repeated? That's just my thoughts on it. And another study heralded glyphosate as the herbicide of the century. They love it because it's low cost. Its ability to inhibit the shikimate pathway doesn't affect humans or animals. It's the least toxic of the currently available pesticides. It's not a carcinogen. It's not a reproductive toxin, and it's not related to any subacute chronic toxicity. It binds tightly to the soil, therefore it has minimal soil activity and very little movement to groundwater. It's not toxic to the atmosphere because it's not volatile. And we also get a decreased CO2 emissions and decreased tillage. So if you just listen to the sales pitch of it and read this article, you would think, wow, glyphosate is our, going to be our savior here. Now, we need to look at bias. Who's going to be biased on the whole glyphosate use? Now, of course, Monsanto owns the patent on it, and they use it in Roundup. So, but Monsanto has a financial interest, so that there's a financial bias to consider. And so, the two studies I found were written by this guy named Duke. Now, I don't know who funded these studies. I couldn't find information on it. I couldn't find anything about Duke. I have a feeling that he probably works for Monsanto or is being paid by Monsanto in some way or fashion. I couldn't find any information on that. And then there's another bias to consider, that these big companies are lobbying to push, glyphosate use. And then they have a huge lobbying effort to prevent the labeling requirements of glyphosate. Every country in the world that even allows glyphosate in GMO in their country requires labeling except for us. And that's because of the anti-labeling effort by Monsanto. And then, of course, the conventional farmers really like using it because what they do is they spray their crops 2 weeks before they harvest, and it really cuts down on the work, and they get a 50% more yield by using glyphosate. They don't have to hire workers to go out there and hand pick weeds. So the farmers like it. Now, the organic farmers tend to be biased against it just because it's a pesticide, and of course, I think I have a bias against it just because I'm more into natural, and I hate big companies like Monsanto that don't really care anything about our health. And the general public has a general dislike and distrust of anything Monsanto produces, and rightfully so. I don't think I have to go into all of the lies and misdeeds of Monsanto. Now, there's some conflicting ideas that were presented. For the pro-glyphosate use, they say it's safe, non-toxic, minimal impact on the soil, minimal impact on the groundwater. But the anti-glyphosate use is that, the new studies out that's showing alternate pathways that are affected besides the shikimate, the potential to destroy our gut microbiota that's leading to chronic illnesses. And then, of course, there's the combined surfactants in Roundup, causing a synergistic effect when combined with glyphosate alone. And the interesting thing is that, when I was doing my master's and we were taking a botanical class, and we had to look at studies and critique them, and somebody posted a study about comparing valerian root to some benzodiazepine for anxiety. And the study showed that valerian root was useless, when you compared it to this benzodiazepine, and everybody's like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought valerian would work, blah, 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 blah. And when I read it, when I looked at the benzodiazepine that they used oxazepam, which is the most potent, and then they used this dose that was 6 times higher than we would ever consider using in the hospital unless somebody was going through DT's alcohol withdrawal. And so they compare these apples to oranges, like they're comparing a BB gun to a bazooka to help people with anxiety, and of course it looks, ineffective. So these people, so if Monsanto is funding a study and they're saying that glyphosate is not poison, when they do their study, did they actually use Roundup, or did they just use glyphosate alone? Because the new studies out by these researchers and scientists are saying that when you add glyphosate to all the other surfactants and all the other ingredients in Roundup, it is 1,000 times more potent and more lethal than just glyphosate alone. So if that's a really huge thing that you have to watch out for when you're reading these studies on what they're actually doing. So the main point that I wanted to summarize in this controversy is that Roundup has other ingredients that makes it much more toxic than just glyphosate alone. And then there's the potential hazardous effect on our soil microbes, and this could cause a future disaster in our ecosystem. And the effects of the glyphosate residue taken up by plants have the same effect on our microbiota, causing a disruption of total body system. And one thing that I didn't mention is that glyphosate has a really high affinity to the roots of these plants. So let's say they're spraying all of the plants. It goes to the root, and the plant actually takes the glyphosate up inside. So it's not like you can take the food that's been sprayed with glyphosate and wash off the pesticide. Yeah, they say it's less toxic, but is it really less toxic? Some of these pesticides you can actually wash off. You can, wash out the outside. But what about these plants that are taking it up inside? And it's inside your fruit. It's inside your vegetables. So that's another thing that we have to consider. And Dr. Senna said that it's affecting our sulfate synthesis and transport. And it's really, related to a lot of cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, because of this sulfate that has to do with a lot of signaling. And I think that the biochemistry around that is a little above my level at this point, but I'm interested in learning that. It decreases the serotonin availability to the brain and the binding of the ion. And the big one that I'm concerned with is manganese, because manganese is needed inside the mitochondria for the superoxide dismutase antioxidant to protect it from free radical damage. So those are the main points, and that's basically all. And I have these references at the end. I'm going to upload this to my group and my MTHFR functional food group. You can look at this PowerPoint another time. So at this point, I'm going to open it up to questions. If you guys have any questions, you can type it in here and ask any questions that you have for me. But that's all I have about my glyphosate. How can we raise manganese? Manganese is in nuts and seeds, a really high amount. If you're really deficient, then you can just take a supplement. It's really not recommended to take more than 2 milligrams a day unless you're deficient. If I see that you're deficient on one of the tests, it's in what again you asked? Okay, you asked that if what foods it manganese in. It's really high amount in nuts and seeds. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Bad audio again. Do we still have bad audio? Okay, I'm going to repeat that because someone said that we had bad audio, and someone asked, how do we raise manganese? You can eat more nuts and seeds, like pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds. It's really high in manganese. It's great now. Okay. I'm holding my phone up so I can talk into it. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, did you learn anything that you didn't already know? So you want to know what to do about it? One thing, okay, yes, everybody's saying yes. The foods that are the highest and the most likely to be affected and be sprayed with and poisoned with glyphosate is grains, soy and wheat are the two biggest glyphosate. So, you want to make sure that you avoid grains that aren't organic. Yeah, grain-free. Good for you, Carly. You're grain-free. I eat grains, but I buy organic breads. But, of course, we're all human, and we want to have a life, and we eat out. So sometimes when I eat out, I'll have whatever is on the table, or whatever I feel like ordering. But the whole thing is we want to eat organic as much as possible. Okay, so that's a really huge benefit of eating organic, and if we're saving our gut. And eating fermented foods, I like to ferment my own ginger, and fermented foods will help replace the good bacteria, and we could also take a probiotic with bifido and lactobacillus, and that will help. And there's an herb called berberine. It's one of my favorite herbs. Berberine stimulates lactobacillus and bifido bacteria, and it inhibits pathogenic strains. So berberine is a really good herb, and I like berberine because it helps stabilize glucose. It helps detoxify the liver. It helps promote good flora. I just take one every day. Well, I've been taking berberine for about 4 years. Someone said only take berberine for a while, right? I've been taking it for 4 years. I don't see a problem with it. I've seen other practitioners say, "Oh no, it's an antibiotic. You can't take it." Well, I don't believe that. I've read studies that said that taking berberine on a regular basis is healthy. It promotes good flora. It prevents pathogenic strains, and it's really good for detoxing and liver support, glucose support, cardiovascular support. Okay. Kathy is saying, can y'all read each other's chat here on the board? I know I can read it. Oh, you can read it. Okay, good. I'm glad you can read each other's chat. I didn't know that it was available for everybody to read. But I think it doesn't show up on the recording. I can record it, but the chat won't show up. So that's why I'm repeating what I'm reading here. Okay. So you're having a party? All right. Does anybody have any other questions? How much? I just take one capsule of berberine. Someone asked how much berberine do I take? I just take one every day, and that's it. But on some of my clients, if they have some pathogenic strains, I may have them take it 3 times a day to help kill off. Because I also use it kind of as an antibiotic as well when there's some pathogenic strains growing. Okay. Okay, great. Thanks for doing this. You are the best. Thank you. Okay. Anybody have any other last-minute questions? This was just really meant to be a short webinar just to kind of tell you guys, because when I started digging into the whole glyphosate, I was kind of surprised at what I found, and I wanted to share it with everybody, and I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe I can start doing some more little short webinars in the future. Okay? All right, I'm going to end the session now, and you guys have a good evening. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.